Hi everybody, welcome back to the Journalism Speaker Series. I'm your host, Nicole Valiente, filling in for Manolo Barco. Here today with us is a very special guest, the first Black female reporter at the Miami Herald, Mrs. Bea Hines. It's a pleasure to have you here, Ms. Hines. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, the pleasure's all mine.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time to be here once again. So I'm excited to ask you all these questions about your time here at MDC and your time at the Herald. So let's get right into it.
Okay.
How did you get into the journalism industry?
Well, when I was a student at Miami-Dade, when I first enrolled at the encouragement of some of my friends and family, I was going to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. I was studying to be, I wanted to be an art teacher. But I had a wonderful supervisor. I was working in the Miami Herald library at the time, and because I started there in 1966 as a file clerk. And my supervisor in the library was the late Louis Bueno. Mm-hmm. And he was so encouraging about my going back to school. So he would allow me to arrange my classes around my work schedule. And so on this particular week, I was working nights. And I became friends with the late Fred Shaw, who at that time, do you know that name?
I do not.
He was the Vice President of Development for Miami-Dade Community College. Oh. But he was also the book editor for the Miami Herald. So he would come in at night to pick up the books that he was going to review. And we became friends. And once or twice I asked him to read some of my papers before I turned them in. And one night he said to me, "What did you say you're studying to?" And I said, "I'm going to be a teacher." And he said, "Oh, no, you need to change your major to journalism." And so I laughed. I said, "They're not going to hire me. I'm black." Like he couldn't see that, right? And so he said, and he didn't laugh. He said, "B, things are changing, and you need to be able to move when the change comes." Mm-hmm. And so I took his advice, and he told me who to get as a journalism teacher, who was the late Barbara Garfunkel. And I enrolled in her classes, and I was having a great time, and then they made me get on the Falcon Times. And I remember the first time I went out on an assignment when I was told to go interview, it was a new cafeteria manager, and I was sent to interview him. And I was so nervous, I just stood there. And they said, "Go on. What are you waiting for?" And then that shocked me back into reality. So I went. And the man was so nice. Mm-hmm. I was able to get a nice story. And that was my first story for the Falcon Times. And two of my friends at the Miami Herald, mm-hmm. Juanita Green and Helen Coram, they both passed now. But Helen and I were the same age. Juanita was about 9 years older. And they had befriended me and became my mentors. And they wanted to see some of my stories from the Falcon Times one day, and I was so proud to bring them to them, but I didn't know they were going to show them to the managing editor.
Oh, wow.
And that's what they did. And Juanita said to Larry Jenks, "You are looking for a black reporter. We have Bea in the library, and she can write. Why don't you hire her?" Mm-hmm. And he did, but he didn't tell me. They forgot to tell me I was hired as a reporter. And I learned when I was on my day off one day, and my friend from the library, Hazel Ashmore, who has passed also, and she was so angry when she called me at home, and it was a Monday, and she said, "Why didn't you tell me you'd been promoted?" And I said, "Promoted to what?"
So you didn't know?
I did not know. I didn't have any idea. And so then I said, "Well," she said, "it's all over the newsroom. Everybody knows." Well, Larry Jenks' secretary passed the word around in the newsroom. Mm-hmm. So when I said, "Okay, well, give me Louis's number." He was off also on Monday, because I didn't want him to think that I had been looking for another job in the paper without first talking to him, because he had been so nice to me about rearranging my schedule so that I could attend classes. So when I called him at home, he said, "Yeah, B, it's true. They're going to call you in tomorrow to talk to you about it." Well, I didn't know what the rest of the day was like because I was so excited. And Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. Mm-hmm. So I went, and you know how you remember certain things about your life? I remember what I was wearing that day and the whole thing. So Larry Jinks called me into his office around 10 or 11 that morning, and then he told me that they were going to take a chance on me and give me a 3-month trial basis as a reporter, on a 3-month trial basis. And I was so happy. I didn't care if it was 1 week. I was happy that they wanted to give me a chance, because prior to that, I had asked for the job as the obituary writer, and they wouldn't let me do that. So I didn't think they would hire me until I had a degree. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's how I got started. And I started, he said, you're going to start in 2 weeks. And I think that was to get the newsroom ready for me, because they knew me as a researcher in the library and a clerk, mm-hmm. but they didn't know me as an equal reporter. And so that's when my trials really started, you know. Because here I was black, I was a woman, and I was green. So they didn't know what to do with me. But as God would have it, there was a riot. There's some good can come out of evil. The riot started the night before I was supposed to start my first day as a reporter. And when I went in that morning on my first day as a reporter in the newsroom, wearing my bright yellow Sunday school teaching dress and my high heel white shoes and my big pocketbook that my friends in the library had given me as a gift to carry my notebooks and stuff in. And I just walked in like, do you know who the Brenda Starr comic strip was? Yes, I do. So I was Miss Brenda Starr that morning. I walked in, I was all dressed up. And then Larry Jinks met me and said, Bea, there's a riot in Liberty City. Are you afraid to cover it? And I'm thinking, is Brer Rabbit scared of the briar patch? Because I lived in Liberty City. I wasn't scared. So I went out to cover the riot with the other reporters, and I had no credentials because it's my first day on the job. I didn't even have a press card. And I wrote Larry's number down on a piece of paper in my notebook, and whenever a cop would stop me, I would give him the number and tell him, because they were asking people not to be on the street. You know, if you didn't have to be out, not to be on the street. And so I said, you can call Larry Jinks and he can verify that I'm a reporter for the Miami Herald, because it was very new to see a black reporter, mm-hmm. especially a woman. So now the Miami Herald had 2 black reporters prior to me. And one was a childhood friend, Thurlee Smith, who was actually the first black reporter hired by the Miami Herald. He is the late brother to Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. Yeah.
Hold that thought, please, Ms. Okay. Hines. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Ms. Bea Hines.
Learn and earn today at Miami-Dade College. College graduates earn 56% more than high school graduates and $1 million more in lifetime earnings. A degree from MDC is your path to greater earning power and career success. Choose from hundreds of affordable high-tech and in-demand career programs, including cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, business, and nursing. Learn and earn today at MDC and fast-track your career. Enroll now at mdc.edu/purpose.
Welcome back to the Journalism Speaker Series. I'm your host, Nicole Valiente, filling in for Manolo Barco. We're back again with Mrs. Bea Hines, and she was telling us about the riots at Liberty City, and that was your first story that you covered as a journalist for the Miami Herald, right?
Yes, that was my first. Actually, the first story that I wrote for the Herald was a book review mm-hmm. that Fred Shaw made me write, and it was called, it was on Leon Sullivan's Burn, Baby Burn. Book, and I did a book review, but they didn't even know who I was. They ran the review, and nobody knew that was me in the library. But anyway, so that was my very first story for the Miami Herald. And then as I'm walking the street, and I'm trying to find out what am I going to write, because I don't know this is my first day on the job, and I walked past a pool hall where they billiards, I guess that's what they call it. Mm-hmm. And 2 men were standing in the doorway, and I heard one of them say, "Man, this riot is killing my business." And so I backed up and I said, "Excuse me, sir." And I told him who I was. I said, "And what is your business?" And he said, "I'm a hustler." And he said his name was Iceberg Slim, not this Iceberg Slim, the real one. So I said, oh, okay, can you tell me what you do? And so what he was doing, he had women on the street. That's what he was hustling. And so I wrote a story about him, and I didn't even know what the deadlines were, but it was kind of a funny story. And it was such a serious time that they put it on the front page because it was kind of light and bright and everything. And that my first story, for my actual first story as a reporter, ran on the front page. And it was just a short story about Iceberg Slim and how the riot was hurting his business. So.
And how did you know to take that angle? Like once you were there covering the riots, you know, there's a lot of commotion. It's your first day on the job covering something live. How did you know to take that angle of like it was kind of humorous, you mentioned. So
Yeah.
how did you know to take that?
I didn't. I think it was divine guidance because I'd prayed a long time. When I had to withdraw from school, I remember walking across the campus and my counselor didn't want me to withdraw. And I was crying, and because I had so much on my shoulders. I had these 2 little boys, and I was working full time, and you know, I was taking care of everything. You know, I didn't want my mother to have to be responsible for my children, so I had a lot on me. And I remember praying, and I said, Lord, you know why I'm going to school, and you know what I'm trying to do. And I asked him to bless me, and I withdrew. This was in April. And by June, I was hired as a reporter. So I feel like it was God answering my prayers, letting me know that even though I felt like I was not prepared, that he would prepare me. Yes. And so that story, I don't know why I backed up when I heard those men talking. It just happened. And so I went back to the office and I said, I think I have a little story. And they said, okay, write it. And I wrote the story, and to my surprise, it ran on the front page. It was so funny. I was so thrilled. But that night, after my first day on the job, and my children were we had a full house at that time. My brother had just come from overseas with his wife and the baby was about a year old then. And they were there living with us because at that time, he was stationed at Homestead, but they didn't have places for black airmen to stay at home. So they were waiting for an apartment in Homestead for him. So he lived with us, and he and his wife and baby. So I came home and I almost crawled in the door because I'd been in these high heel shoes all day long, walking the street. It's hot. I'm wearing a polyester dress. Do you know what polyester is?
Yes.
Do you know how hot it is?
No, actually, no.
It was a pretty dress, but it was hot. And so I walked, and my children, I flopped on the couch, and Rick took one shoe off, and Sean took the other shoe off, and they were rubbing my feet. They were so proud of me. And my mom, who didn't want me to, who wanted me to either be a nurse, a social worker, or a teacher, had no idea I was studying journalism because I was afraid to tell her because she thought I was a dreamer anyway, and I figured she wouldn't keep my children while I went to school. So she was so shocked when I became a reporter. That is when she knew that I had been studying journalism. So but she took all the credit. She was so proud of me. She took all the credit. But it was okay. It was okay.
And what motivated you to become a journalist when your mom didn't approve of that?
I don't know. Again, all I can say was divine intervention because I always liked to write. When I was a child, I used to write stories for my younger brother and poems. And I wrote plays for my church. I remember when I was 15, I wrote an Easter play that they performed and let us, the Sunday school department, perform in my church. And I was so proud of that. I was like the playwright and the director and everything. I had no idea. I just saw movies and I thought this is what they do. And that's what I did. So I always had a love of drawing and writing. Creating things is what I like to do. And I still like to do that.
And after you started incorporating yourself more into the Herald as a journalist, what were some of the trials you felt you had being not only the first Black female at the Reporter, but also it being something, you know, that you were taking on without prior prior experience?
Well, I think I didn't have sense enough to be scared. I was so excited about being given the opportunity, and I just felt like somehow this was going to work out. I always felt that if God puts you in a position, He will help you go through it. And so after the riot, after there were no more stories to cover about the riot, there were times when they didn't want white reporters into the meetings that they were holding in Liberty City. And I was able to get in because nobody knew. Well, they didn't want any reporters, period. But they didn't know I was a reporter because my face hadn't been in the paper, no picture of me. They didn't make an announcement that this is our new black reporter or anything like that. So nobody knew who I was. But I knew some of the people who were running the programs. And so I would slip into the meetings, but I couldn't take notes. I had to memorize everything. And thank God for a good memory, because I would memorize quotes and then I would read them back to somebody. I didn't want my name on the paper because I figured somebody would notice my name and they would attach me with the Miami Herald. So Sam Jacobs was one of the ones who used to do the rewrite for my stories. And I remember one day when I went into a meeting, the day after one story had run, and I heard one of the guys say, "Man, did you see that story in the Miami Herald this morning? We have a spy in here," because it was word for word. And I wanted to say, that was me. But I didn't. And the reason I was so pleased is because it was accurate, you know. That was very important to me.
We're going to take a short break again, Ms. Hines, so we'll be right back.
Okay.
Learn and earn today at Miami-Dade College. College graduates earn 56% more than high school graduates and $1 million more in lifetime earnings. A degree from MDC is your path to greater earning power and career success. Choose from hundreds of affordable high-tech and in-demand career programs, including cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, business, and nursing. Learn and earn today at MDC and fast-track your career. Enroll now at mdc.edu/purpose.
Thank you for joining us again to the Journalism Speaker Series. I'm your host, Nicole Valiente, and we're back with Mrs. Bea Hines, the first female black journalist at the Miami Herald. Mrs. Hines, you were telling us about how some of the challenges you were experiencing as a black female reporter at the paper, and some of the benefits actually that you had because you had something that other white journalists didn't have.
That's true. One of the things, well, first, after the riot was over, the city desk didn't really know what to do with me because at the time we had the influx of Cuban refugees coming, and so there were stories there, and but they were overlooking the black community. So they really didn't know what to do with me. So they would send me, I went on wild goose chases. I remember two specific ones where one of them was where I was sent to the dump, the county dump. And I'm thinking, this address is the dump. I'm driving, again, hot, summertime, wearing a polyester dress, because that's what they did back in those days. But I didn't have any air conditioning in my car. Wow. So I get to, now the dumps have green grass, and they look like little hills. These were big mounds of gray, black dirt, and they had buzzards flying overhead, you know. And so I said, okay, Lord, if I don't go, they're going to say that I don't follow instructions and that I'm hard to work with. So I said a prayer that my car wouldn't sink down in all that dirt, and I followed the path that the trucks took as they were dumping stuff. And then when I got at the top, I turned around, and I was really angry because I knew they were playing games with me. I knew this wasn't an assignment. So when I got back to the office, I had to do one of two things. I could either be angry and go back and be mad and say ugly things, or I could go back and pretend that they didn't know that this was the dump. So I chose to pretend that they didn't know it was the dump. And so I got a gospel song and I sang it all the way back downtown. By the time I got in the Herald parking lot, I was feeling okay. So I walked into the city room and I said, hey, somebody made a mistake on this assignment. It was the county dump. And they couldn't even look at me. The guys at the desk couldn't even look at me. They were so embarrassed. And they were expecting me to scream and holler, and I guess, and be colored. But I didn't. And so after another incident similar to that, where they told me that there was a family of 6 or 8 had been evicted in a park off 22nd Avenue, right off US 1. I don't know the area, but every time I pass that, I think about that day. And there was no family there. There was a park. It was nobody being evicted. And so when I came back into the office that day, I went to Steve Rogers, who was the city editor at the time. And I told him, I said, you know what? I have 2 sons. I'm a widow. I'm raising these 2 little boys. I have to put food on the table for them and clothes on their back and give them a place to live. And these guys are playing games with me because they didn't want any women in the city room at that time. There were only about 4 women that I can remember who worked as reporters on the city side. Everybody else worked in the women's department. And so I said, you don't cover the black community. You never have done a very good job of. Only time we got in the paper was if some kid robbed a 7-Eleven store or something like that, or there was a murder. It was a small, maybe 4 lines in the paper. So I said, why don't you let me cover the black community? And he said, okay, show us what you have. And I went out and literally knocked on doors. And at the time, although white people and Cubans were on welfare, it was the black women that they picked at. And they talked about the welfare mamas and how they had TVs in the home and blah, blah, blah. So I went and knocked on one door one day in the project. And I asked the woman I said, are you on welfare? And she said, yes. She thought I was a social worker. And I told her who I was and I would like to do a story showing what she did with her monthly check. And she said, all right. And I walked in the department. It was clean. She had 4 or 5 children. And there was a tiny TV sitting in the living room. And so when she got her check, she called me. And I went shopping with her. And the story ran on the front page, on page 1A. And they had my hands holding the grocery receipt, the list of the things that she bought. That was a picture that they took. And it ran with the story. And I think what that did was show people that, you know, yes, there are black people on welfare, but we're not the only ones, you know, and this is what she does with the money. Not all people who are on welfare mess up with the money and do crazy things with it. Some of them really take care of their children and provide for them, and that's what the story said. And then they didn't know about, I told them about my growing up in Overtown. And at that time, they were calling the area the Central Negro District on the first reference. And down in the story, if they have to refer to it, it was a CND. So when I started writing stories about Northwest 2nd Avenue, which we call the Strip, and what it was like growing up over there and all the places that we went and the businesses that we had and the fun that it was to be on the classic weekend, the Orange Blossom Classic, when Florida A&M would come, and the parades, and how we sat early in the morning on the curbs so we could get a seat to see the parade. And I referred to the area as Overtown, and the editors would take that name out of my stories. And one day I said, why do you do that? He said, well, we don't know it as Overtown. We know it as the Central Negro District. And I said, but that's what you people call it, but we know it as Overtown. You ask any black person in this city, they will know Overtown. And some white people, because a lot of white people used to come to the Sir John Hotel and the Mary Elizabeth Hotel because they had the greatest entertainment. And they would come. We couldn't go to their clubs and theaters, but they could come to Overtown. And so they said, okay, well, you can't say I'm going Overtown. You have to say I'm going to Overtown. I said, deal. So from then on, whenever I mentioned Overtown, they let it stay in. And so everybody else picked up on it. The TV people picked up on the area as being Overtown, the radio. And when there was a riot, the McDuffie riot, they pinpointed Overtown as one of the areas where it happened. But it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't fought for that name to be in the paper. And, you know, and that's what we call it now. If you ride Overtown, there are signs that say, welcome to Overtown.
Yes.
So. That's my contribution.
In the last 30 seconds we have left, can you tell us what encourages you to still continue writing to this day? Because I know you're still a columnist for the Herald and you continue writing about religion and about community issues. What motivates you to stay writing?
First of all, I'm 85, and it helps me to be in tune with what's going on around me. And so that motivates me. But actually, when I retired in 2001, I was asked to stay on as a freelance. And I was really thrilled that they wanted me to stay on as a freelance writer. And at that time, I was doing 2 columns, and now I'm doing 1 column. But that motivates me, yeah.
Thank you so much for giving us your time today, Ms. Hines. We so appreciate you being here. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next speaker series.